Good afternoon, everyone. This is Leon Vainstain speaking from Los Angeles, California. In recent years, the world has been constantly shaken. Write every day, as Hemingway advised. By the way, the Chinese also say, "May God not let you be born in times of great change," and the British say, "No news is good news." Well, we do have news, and a lot of it. Then Biden's press secretary announces that she's breaking with the Democratic Party, which she defended so passionately from the podium. Then we cancel visas for 300,000 Chinese students. Then we find out who was running the country instead of the incapacitated President Biden, and so on. NATO Secretary General declares that Ukraine is on its way to joining the alliance, while 4 alliance members say that he has lost his mind. But today we will focus on one event in particular, namely the bombing of airfields on Russian territory and the explosion of the Crimean Bridge. It was cool and awesome. Or did this doom Ukraine to more deaths and destruction? Let's start with the latest events, and then we'll go back to the origins and reasons.
We begin this hour with breaking news from the White House with a statement from President Donald Trump. He says that he spoke with President Vladimir Putin. Let's turn to Columbia Broadcasting System news reporter Aaron Navarro, who is joining us now from the White House in Washington.
Aaron, what can you tell us about this? Yes, Mugo? In this publication by President Trump, he says that he and President Putin from Russia talked for an hour and 15 minutes, and that Putin spoke to President Trump. That he, I quote, was very decisive. They will have to respond to the attacks by Ukrainian drones that took place over the weekend, when the drones were actually secretly brought in, hidden in semi-trailers, and caused damage to Russian planes and bombers. Trump also added, I quote, "It was a good conversation, but not the kind of conversation that will lead to immediate peace."
A good conversation, says Trump, but it won't bring us to peace in Eastern Europe.
And you were talking about President Trump having a conversation with Putin, and it almost seemed like a good conversation. But then he didn't mention in his post, when he said that Putin is going to respond to that attack from Ukraine, he didn't say anything in response to that. In that post, there was nothing like, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't do that," or "Be careful." Because for a long time now, we've seen how he writes on social media about how many lives are being destroyed, how many people have died because of this war. But nothing from the White House about this conversation, and maybe calling for let's stop the drone attacks and things like that. Nothing from the president about this.
Yes, nothing. We haven't heard any statements from him over the weekend regarding these Ukrainian drone strikes. This is also an interesting point, because in the past week, you've seen President Trump publicly criticize the Russian president, saying that he should end this war as soon as possible. Although we know that Secretary Rubio is already negotiating, at least with Turkish officials. In response to these strikes and the ongoing peace talks, President Trump himself has not yet reacted in any way.
So, after the attack on 5 airports, a train, and the Crimean Bridge, Trump contacted Putin. And for about an hour and 15 minutes, he apparently talked to him about something. I suspect that he told him he didn't know exactly what the Ukrainians were preparing. And let's say that he didn't know they were planning to carry out a series of operations deep in the rear of Russia during the negotiations in Istanbul. Naturally, after this operation took place, the Russians had a question. Trump said he wants to stop the destruction and killing, but at the same time encourages similar actions aimed at disrupting the negotiations. I'm not talking right now about whether Russia might also have done something to disrupt the negotiations. We are not arming or helping Russia. Russia is, in fact, for the most part, representing another country, even though we try to present ourselves as a neutral mediator. It's difficult because we supply weapons and so on and so forth. All right, we'll figure it out. That's not the point. I hope you understand that the honor of the uniform will now make Russia seek serious revenge, so that the population of Russia would be happy. From the destruction that their leader inflicted on the Ukrainian fascists, as they are called in fascist Russia. So what happened that led to the breakdown of the negotiations? But the breakdown of negotiations is obvious, and a new round of military escalation is underway. First of all, two United States senators, Graham and Blumenthal, went to Ukraine for the weekend. I think they spent a day and a night there, paid $400,000 each, so together that's $800,000, almost $1 million of our money for just one day. What did they do there? And they told Zelensky why did they go there, that they fully support the continuation of military actions. They spent nearly $1 million of our money, which likely totaled $1 million when including the flight, entourage, and other expenses. Yes, I suspect that they spent $1 million of our money. Just to tell Zelensky the same thing, which could have easily been told to him over a video call, for example. And yet they went and told him in person. I think this was the 4th visit, maybe even the 5th visit in the last 12 months. Grema and Blumenthal, Grema in Ukraine. They told me. So if they pass the plan for secondary sanctions on Russia through the Senate, that means there will be a 500% tariff on all goods from countries that buy from Russia. That's oil, gas, and all sorts of nuclear things, right? The list of countries is as follows. Did you understand what the conversation was about? About whom? If the Blumenthal and Graham bill passes, which countries will we be imposing a de facto embargo on? The first are China, India, Turkey, Germany, Austria, France, Spain, Japan, South Korea, not to mention Georgia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and the Netherlands. They all fall under this very law. That is, the brilliant plan implies imposing a de facto embargo, a 500% tariff. This embargo on the whole world. Well, maybe not the whole world, but almost the whole world. I think Indonesia is excluded. And 81 senators, according to Graham, are willing to support this. This. I don't even want to use a word to describe it because people will get offended at me. When asked then how he feels about Graham's plan in Blumenthal, Trump replied that he hadn't read it, which means he doesn't even want to talk about it. I understand him. He has to somehow avoid offending Senator Graham, but Graham, he's always been a hawk, even I would say a vulture. He's a Republican, and Kelly Clinton, for example, is a Democrat. They both have always advocated and voted to bomb, to retaliate, to respond blow for blow, and so on. So there hasn't been a war yet that this pair hasn't called to participate in. That's why it was so funny to watch when Clinton Shah brought the reset button to Orlov. Graham and Blumenthal practically supported the European countries that are pushing Ukraine to continue the war and spoke out against the policy of the United States of America. This is prohibited in the United States of America, by the way, by a law called the Logan Act. Foreign policy is the exclusive domain of the president and his team, including the State Department and similar bodies. No other individual or entity has the authority to intervene in this area. If a senator, congressman, another politician, or any other person flies to a country with which we have some kind of relations or negotiations and wants to do something or participate in something, they must contact the State Department. If he is a senator, he can contact the White House directly. And accordingly, after the conversation, receive either a yes or no, an approval for something, or disapproval for something. So when you act against this law, basically anyone, I think, including a United States senator, can be arrested. All right, let's keep watching.
We're being sucked into a kinetic. Right now, we're being drawn into a kinetic Third World War that will eclipse the First and Second World Wars of the 20th century, and we're being relentlessly pulled into it more and more each day. What the Ukrainians did and what was stated in the White House, they received no warning about it. They attacked Russia's strategic triad, something even Curtis LeMay wouldn't have considered. They disabled 41 out of 100, destroyed 40% of Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. This attack was bold, daring, and courageous. All of that is true, but we cannot allow a country that we sponsor with such money, with which we sign economic agreements and now declare that we will participate in its development. She believed that it could actually attack Russian territory and drag us into a conflict with Russia, which could escalate into something bigger. If they don't think they need to, if they don't believe they need to, return to the United States and ask for permission, or from the deep state under Vice President Biden, as it was reported that this war is being directed by German and American intelligence. There may be two options. We must find the truth. We are being drawn into a conflict with the Communist Party of China and with Russia. People don't realize what's happening in the world and how we're being drawn in, supposedly by those we support. For example, Zelensky. To find out that he never warned the White House, he never asked for permission for this. He would have executed a brilliant but profound attack on a portion of their nuclear capabilities. Basically, we are putting our B-52s out of commission, which are old Russian planes. It's outrageous, and Lindsey Graham keeps stoking the flames every weekend. We can't allow people there to incite, to tell Ukrainians that we will support them even more. Our task is to calm the situation down. What President Trump is trying to say is, listen, let's achieve a ceasefire. Let's lay down our arms. Let's talk about peace and prosperity. We do not support this economic agreement, but President Trump says he needs it as a central part of the peace plan. But we cannot allow Lindsey Graham or especially Zelensky to drag us into World War III. Gentlemen, this is not
a talking head. This is Trump's chief strategist. This is the man who led Trump to victory in 2016 and is still a member of the very close circle of the president's friends and advisors. This is Steve Bannon, who influences United States politics and whom everyone goes to for advice. Lindsey
Graham is stirring it up right now. All of this is happening right now. People need to understand that we are being dragged into this war. If the intelligence community really did this, then it's an act of war against Russia. The American people have voted for war with the Russian people. This is all very serious. No, listen, I'm being serious. Curtis LeMay is at the peak of his career. And during the hardest years in the Soviet Union, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we couldn't even imagine going out and destroying 40% of their bombers right on the runways. The attack was daring. It was brilliant. However, this pulls us into an unwanted conflict in the United States, making it more challenging for us to withdraw from it.
I'm not sure they destroyed 40. It seems like fewer, but that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Both sides' propaganda will, of course, lie. Roughly speaking, the truth is somewhere between 10 and 42, something like that. But again, even the number doesn't matter. The fact itself is what's important. According to information published on the website of the Russian Ministry of Defense, it was published, which means it was published a day before June 1st, that they are planning a massive bombing of Ukrainian cities to show what will happen if Ukraine does not accept their so-called conditions at the peace negotiations. This information was urgently removed from the internet after the explosion. Of course, there aren't 417 drones at the airfields. Excuse me, but only 117 drones were taken out of Ukraine to Russia, hidden in trucks with such opening roofs. These drones took off almost simultaneously in Murmansk, Irkutsk, Ryazan, and Ivanovo. I don't remember the fifth one, and they attacked. So, as we were told, there are 41 or 42 heavy bombers there. 295, 222 MS, and AI-50S. They have such interesting names. Tupolev, that's right, exactly. Maybe Antonov. Ukraine claims it prevented the bombing of cities, while Russians call it an attack on the nuclear arsenal of the Russian Federation. But the question isn't about what kind of moral satisfaction Ukrainians got. Of course, they did get it, yes. from the bombing by airplanes, the destruction of the Crimean Bridge. And how will this operation affect the continuation of military actions? Here's what Ukrainians think.
Europe together with America has. Europe together with America has more modern weaponry than Russia. We also have stronger tactical solutions. Our Operation Patina proved that yesterday. Russia must feel what its losses mean. That is exactly what will push it toward diplomacy. And when Russia suffers losses in this war, it's obvious to everyone that it is Ukraine that is defending not only itself, but all of Europe.
You might have noticed when he arrived in Vilnius, Zelensky looked noticeably more energetic there, to be honest. It was a long-awaited, necessary boost for the Ukrainian fighting spirit, which had suffered greatly after that scandalous incident in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump. Will this change Russia's position? Many believed that these peace talks in Istanbul were yet another example of stalling by Moscow, which had minimal desire to bring them to a ceasefire. But this might make the Kremlin think, if such surprises happen often enough, how long will they be able to continue this conflict? And this could really cause practical damage to their military efforts. John, these were truly remarkable weekends. It's also worth noting that over the weekend, Russia launched a record number of drones, and remarkably many of them were shot down with the help of Ukraine's electronic warfare systems. So technology is increasingly on the side of Ukraine.
John, yes, Ukraine is really trying to increase the costs for Russia, and it's interesting how this might affect future negotiations. Nick Payden-Walsh joined us. Thanks, Nick.
And now let's take a closer look at these important events. Now we are joined by Admiral James Stavridis. He is Cable News Network's senior military analyst and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces. We are also joined by senior political commentator and former Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He was also a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee and served in the Air National Guard. Glad to see you both. Thank you very much, Congressman. My first question to you is, do you think this is a turning point, or does it have some other significance if Ukraine succeeds in doing this?
Yes, this is really very important. I would even say that this is comparable to the moment when Ukraine carried out its very successful counteroffensive operation. Keep in mind that not so long ago, the President of the United States stated that Ukraine has no trump cards. But these are trump cards, and these are serious trump cards, by the way. The potential destruction of a third of Russia's bomber aviation, that's what this could mean. And this is a strike that has no equal. And don't forget, Ukraine is actually winning this war. For a country that is defending itself, to win, it just needs to keep defending until the attacker's combat potential is exhausted.
So the idea of politicians, war enthusiasts, is that the war should continue until Russia runs out of steam, or until the United States of America gets drawn into World War III. And what does Admiral Stavridis think about this?
So, Admiral, what does this say about you, Admiral? What does this say about Ukraine's prospects? Is this enhanced reconnaissance, or is it a new order or a strategy?
It's all of the above, and I'll add something else. This is a highly intelligent tactic. They put these quadcopter drones into trucks and brought them deep, deep into Russia. To understand the scale of these strikes, imagine that you launch them from Washington and attack targets in Los Angeles. I mean, Russia is a huge country, the largest in the world. These strikes are carried out over a long distance, as the congressman said. And by the way, he didn't mention his most important advantage for this conversation. He's an Air Force pilot, so he really understands what air distances are and how impressive that is. So Fred combined drone technologies, location intelligence, and military ingenuity to load all this into trucks, to carry it across this vast country, to launch it on a large scale and over a great distance. I think this is an amazing strike. I'm Greek by origin, so I have to tell you this. This is a kind of Trojan horse. It's like those wooden boxes that they pushed into the country. And suddenly warriors appear from them, destroying all these planes, and none of them are human. This is truly an outstanding military achievement.
So you heard two different points of view. One is just that this is a remarkable operation. Ukraine is winning. I didn't quite understand exactly what Ukraine is winning, but the war must continue because in the future, positive changes might happen. That is, as I told you, the idea of Andrei Nikolaevich Illarionov is not to stop, because maybe, of course, you will all die, but maybe something will happen and you will get Ukraine back. So it's a kind of Las Vegas roulette approach, but instead of money or chips, you bet the lives of millions of Ukrainians and wait. Well, maybe you'll win. Maybe it will work out. The second point of view is Steve Bannon, the United States State Department, and a whole group of Make America Great Again Republicans who believe that Ukraine has once again missed the chance to end the war. Yes, with the loss of territory. Yes, with the enemy going unpunished. It's like, I don't know, maybe it's a silly example, but a mother has two sons. One of them was killed, and she has a choice. So she can try to kill the robber, but if she fails, the second son will die too. Or she can leave the robber in the house. She can save herself by keeping the second son alive. Banana is worried about something else entirely. He and his supporters do not want to become participants in the war in Ukraine. And European leaders, as well as some politicians from the United States of America, are diligently trying to make us, the United States of America, a party to the conflict. Look at what they are telling us to stir up our emotions.
In Russia's response, you will see attacks on schools, on hospitals, on civilian infrastructure. That's precisely how Russia behaves. Ukraine fights with honor while Russia attacks civilians.
I'm not saying that's not the case. But then we should mention that on that same June, first Ukrainians derailed a passenger train full of civilians. I just don't like one-sided coverage of events. Well, you and I are not interested in the short-term satisfaction that Ukraine responded to Russia and even hit, let's say, several important targets. But how will this affect the further development of events? Let's try to think, gentlemen, as they say. First, Russia will respond. It has been allowing 300 to 400 drones for a long time, which will be noted. There will be no talk of peace yet. Ukraine will receive fresh wounds and emotions both from victory and from loss. They won't allow any movement toward a peaceful resolution. Second, Russia's opinion about its ability to wage and win the war has not changed. It has stayed the same as it was. What happened were just pinprick operations. Unpleasant, painful, annoying, irritating, but nothing more than that. They encourage hardliners regarding Ukraine. That is, those moderate voices that always exist, that are always present in circles discussing international conflicts, will at least temporarily have to fall silent. Third, the operation will not change Russia's demands for the terms of a truce. Russia perceives any ceasefire as an opportunity to regroup. So this tactical delay, this skillful operation, did not bring any changes to the main front, except perhaps worsening the chances for peace. The Ukrainians were encouraged, and now they will be filled with new hatred from the response. I understand that you might say it's impossible to hate even more, but the old hatred dries up a bit, and the new one starts to boil again. The Russians will take an even tougher stance. But what is probably even more important is that in recent weeks, Trump has started preparing pressure on Russia. After this attack, Trump can't tell the Kremlin that everyone except you wants peace, and now Putin has an excuse. I told you it would be impossible to negotiate with Ukraine. They will stab you in the back, and here you go. America and even NATO will drag you into this war. Do you want to be dragged into this war? We really don't want to be dragged into this war. Here is the rising star of the Republican Party, Anna Paulina Luna, expressing the opinion of the majority of the Make America Great Again movement.
They are a member of NATO. Zelensky hasn't held real elections since the war began, which raises questions about the state of democracy in Ukraine. But besides that, if you look at the overall United States spending in NATO, it's 3.38% of the defense budget, and that's a lot of money. And I would like to point out that we just saw 2 senators go to Ukraine to film a vlog. Senators Blumenthal and Graham made those comments, I believe, over the weekend. But if we just talk about their sanctions bill with Graham, it's basically another classic move from Washington. The 2025 sanctions law against Russia imposes 500% tariffs and banking bans on Moscow. But where is the accountability for how the billions in previous aid were spent? The Biden administration poured millions and billions of dollars into Ukraine without any oversight, without audits, without results. Now this bill requires $55 million for monitoring, while Section 17 imposes tariffs on other countries buying Russian oil, which China will circumvent through third parties. America's policy, especially that of Trump, does not write blank checks. It demands verifiable victories. And if Europe is not going to take on military responsibility, why should American taxpayers fund their show of security? Sanctions without forcing negotiations are simply a showy policy. You know, I was just with the Institute for Partnership for Democracy in the House of Representatives. We were in Belgium, met with the European Union, and met with some NATO countries. What can I say? Countries not bordering Ukraine are the ones advocating for war. But there are countries like Romania, countries like Moldova that want peace and fully support President Trump's agenda. I'm bringing up this issue because I truly believe that if we continue to fund NATO at its current level, we're just looking for excuses instead of forcing them to take a realistic position in peace negotiations.
If we give money to NATO, and they in turn transfer part of that money to Ukraine in one form or another, then none of them feel any sense of urgency. Now I'll speak for myself, not for Luna. And they're not the ones at the front. Those who make these decisions, it's not their children. The children of these politicians, of people from the mass media, have long and comfortably been living abroad, and not even in countries bordering Ukraine. Here's what I personally think, gentlemen, about the brilliantly planned and artistically executed strikes by Ukraine against Russia. This is a double-edged, as they say, mutually sharp sword. Or in other words, this event has 2 very different sides. On one hand, Ukraine's ability to strike targets deep inside Russia, to attack strategic facilities and important nodes of the Russian military machine. They show that they might have some other surprises up their sleeve. Plus, if it's true that Russia was planning to launch those bomber aircraft and carry out a massive attack on Ukraine on June 1st, this means that Ukraine has its own people inside Russian headquarters, and not just in one place. On the other hand, such strikes, which are not decisive for the outcome of the war, carry an emotional charge. Well, let's say punishing Ukraine could lead to the dominance of those in Russia who support a tougher stance toward Ukraine and toward President Trump's efforts. Well, at least for now, if there was any progress in the negotiations, or if Trump started preparing pressure on Russia, all of that has been postponed and frozen. In other words, until the passions subside, Russians and Ukrainians will continue to die on the battlefield. More and more. The chance to stop the slaughter has been postponed indefinitely. And to decide, is it good that the Ukrainians struck, or is it not worth the trouble? It's up to you to decide. Each of you, ladies and gentlemen, each of you must decide. Goodbye until we meet again.